Hey everyone, Pastor Joseph coming to you, and so excited about this opportunity we have to just continue on talking about overflow in our marriages. And I'm really excited about this session, and I think this is going to be a fun session, but it's so important for us just to talk through this topic. And today we're going to talk about how to overflow in intimacy in our marriage. I always think about intimacy within our marriages with a great illustration about a fire in a fireplace. And I want you to think about that. Think about the purpose of that fire in that fireplace and kind of what's happening there in that moment. The reality is that you think about what happens if that fire gets out of the fireplace. Even one small spark, when it gets out of the fireplace, what happens? Well, man, there's total destruction that occurs. And then we have to think about as well, if I'm depending upon this fire, what am I doing to make sure that the fire doesn't go out? And so as you just kind of have that imagery, I want us just to think about intimacy today in our marriages. And I want you to listen to this. Hebrews 13, verse 4. It says that marriage should be honored by all and the marriage bed kept pure. For God will judge the adulterer and the sexual immoral. And you stop and you think about that, and what's this talking about in this passage? It's saying starting the fire is to happen in the right place. Whenever we're looking at intimacy within our marriage and we're thinking about those things, we got to remember the fire is to start and to be in the right place so that destruction doesn't occur. Now you think about that. Sex was designed for procreation, yes, but as well for pleasure. God gave us sex as a gift, and so we have to remember, yes, it's there for us to be numerous, right? To multiply within the earth. But it's also there for our pleasure, which is amazing to just stop and think about how God designed that. But sex is designed as well to be personal, meaning that it's our fire, it's our responsibility to keep the flame burning. And so it's so important whenever we think about sex within our marriage is that it starts in the right place. Now, here's the other thing. We got to prevent the fire from escaping. Listen to what it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 2 and 4. It says, but since sexual immorality is occurring, each man should have sexual relations with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Now, I want you to think about how these verses are speaking to preventing the fire from escaping. When the fire goes out of the fireplace, as we said, destruction occurs. That's why it says there in that passage that it's to be with their own wife, their own husband, right? Destruction, you might ask the question, what does that even look like when we're talking about destruction? Well, it can look like pornography today. It can look like affairs, infidelity that's occurring. It can look at even misplaced affections. All those things are things that impact the fire that we have within our marriage. They're things that want to go to that fire and take it out of the fireplace and put it in the house somewhere else to see total destruction occur. And so we've got to prevent that. And let me just say as well, if pornography is a part of your marriage or part of you individually in any type of way, you got to get out of that. Once again, all that's doing is just misplacing your affections. It's misplacing your heart, your desires that God has for you. And so we got to prevent the fire from escaping. Now, here's the last thing. Talk about keeping the fire burning. Talk about keeping the fire burning. What does that mean? Listen to what it says in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 5. It says, do not deprive each other, perhaps by mutual consent for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. That's what it says there. Do not deprive each other except by mutual consent. What are we doing? We're talking about keeping the fire burning. What does that mean? Miscommunicated expectations are some of the biggest reasons some couples struggle in their sex life. Sometimes guys, we want to have this idea that whenever I come into the marriage relationship, well, that just means I get to have sex every single day. And the reality is that, if that's worked out between you and your spouse, that's true, but that may be an unrealistic expectation for you and your wife. And so sometimes we can have these struggles in thinking about that because we're not talking about it. Once again, we're bringing our expectations, our assumptions into our marriage in that way. And also misplaced expectations, you know what they can lead to? They can lead to guilt, shame, and resentment in the process more than pleasure. You know, sex between you and your wife, you and your husband, that ought to be a pleasurable moment, a pleasurable experience. But whenever we're bringing misplaced expectations into our marriage, especially into our sex life, we don't want to see guilt occur. We don't want to see shame occur. We don't want to see resentment by any kind of means. And so those are things we have to talk about and communicate in those moments. So here's kind of the application, kind of wrap this up is, well, number one, keep the fire burning. You have a spouse, God's giving you that spouse for a purpose, and you need to keep the fire burning between you guys. And sometimes you may be at a place where you say, you know what, we need to restart the fire. Well, restart it. Go do a retreat. Go do something. Get away and have some ways in which you restart the fire. Now, let me give you some final things just to kind of remember about sex as well. First, it's not a bargaining chip. We don't need to use sex as a bargaining chip. Well, if you do this, then I'll give you some, okay? That's not the intent of sex by any kind of means, which means it's also not a reward, right? It means that it's not to be used as a reward. Now, do we want to sometimes show our affection after our spouse has done something, for us? That's fine. That's totally fine. But it doesn't need to be that I'm striving only to do that in my marriage. It also involves communication before, during, and after, right? So for us, what we got to think about is, how am I communicating? How am I listening to my spouse? Am I addressing her needs just as much as my needs? And is she wanting that as well? And so I've got to listen in those moments. But it also involves our emotions, both before, during, and after. And so how am I meeting her emotional needs through this moment of just total openness and transparency in that time? And so once again, intimacy in our marriage, it can be something that if we're not dealing with properly, it can be part of misplaced expectations. It can cause struggles, and it can encourage us, or sometimes we're tempted to want to take the fire out of the fireplace. That's not the intent of it. The marriage that we have, the intimacy that we have, it's meant to be a fire that burns for us, and we have to build into it. We've got to stoke the fire. We got to keep the flame going. God bless you guys. Looking forward to connecting with you at the next time where we come together to talk about how to have more overflowing marriages in our lives. God bless.